Welcome to the InfoMullet YouTube channel. If you enjoy this content, please like or share. And if you'd like to support the InfoMullet by becoming a Mulleteer, visit us on Patreon. We appreciate your support. Hey there, this is Tim Clancy. I was asked yesterday to kind of explain as a background what's going on in the Kurdish regions of northern Syria and Iraq, and I wrote a long post and Facebook ate it. So it actually may be easier to use a map and do this verbally, and it may be quicker. So I'm going to pick a point in time to explain what's going on now, and I'm going to pick it at the end of the Iraq-Iran war and go through a really brief overview to kind of give context to all these different things that have happened in the last 30 years and how they all are coming together now. So it's an arbitrary point in time. It's a complex region with a complex history, but just for orientation, we've got Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, Iran's over here, Turkey's up in here, Saudi Arabia's down beneath, you get the general guess. So Gulf War I happens. Iraq invades Kuwait, U.S. bases in Saudi Arabia. As we know, the U.S. moves into Iraq and kind of liberates Kuwait. And what happens from that is there are two regions carved out of Iraq for special protection status from the U.S. so that Saddam Hussein cannot do reprisals against his own population. One of those is in the south here. This is the Shia-dominated area of the country. And the other one, key to our discussion, is up here in this northern area of Iraq here. This is what becomes called as Kurdistan, although it doesn't have that legal status. It becomes a specially administrated and protected region where basically the Kurds in this area are able to operate autonomously. Now, the Kurdish factions in this area, this is a key thing. The two main groups here is the KDP and the PUK. These are two political factions within this administrative region. They're generally pro-West, pro-democracy. They're relatively clan-based. Families have a huge influence in those politics. But the KDP and the PUK are basically allies of the U.S. They have been allies with us. We have worked with them since 1991, 2, when the special administrative region. However, earlier in the 80s, in the southern part of Turkey, remember this is Turkey, right? So in the southern part of Turkey along the border with Iraq, and in these mountain areas, there's a terrorist group called the PKK. And this is a Marxist ideology faction within the Kurdish people or ethnographic group that are basically waging an insurgency against Turkey. And there's lots of complexity in there I'm not going to get into, but it's key to say that the PKK is very, very different than the KDP and the PUK that are down here in the area. So, and again, Syria over here, we didn't get into because it's got the Lebanon war. These things have happened and are sort of ending in the 90s. This is the state of play from 1990, the end of the Gulf War I through the start of the second Gulf War. So in the second Gulf War, key things happen. First, President Erdogan gains power in Turkey right before the Gulf War happens. And an initial U.S. plan to invade Iraq through the north, through Turkey, down through the French Kurdish areas is actually blocked by Turkey so that we cannot move armed forces. And this requires us to operate up here in special forces only. It was a huge change to the plan, and it was because of the rise in power of President Erdogan. And this becomes important later. So the U.S. then basically deploys troops, that mainly special forces in this area. We do the invasion from the south. Everyone kind of knows that the insurgency breaks out. The Sunni triangle that you often hear about is in this area: Baghdad, Al-Fallujah, Ramadi, Samarra, Tikrit. These are all heavily Sunni areas. The Shia are in the south, down here. Mukhtar al-Sadr and those groups, al-Sistani, they're all down here. And going up north, the Kurds are quickly sort of recognized and functioning after the Iraq War, the second Iraq War, as their own standalone government. So at this point, the special region has almost become a fully autonomous province. Now, ethnographically speaking, the Kurds actually occupy this entire region across all these borders here. But key to this is this northern arc here, sort of east of the, is this the Euphrates? I think this is the Euphrates here, maybe the Tigris. It's one of the two major rivers. Anyways, the key here is in this northern area are Kurdish that are ethnographically similar to the Kurds in this region, Obviously, it's the same Kurdish group, but their politics are somewhere between what you might call the Marxist PKK and the pro-West KDP. I keep forgetting the other one, KDP PUK, which we call Kurdistan. So fast forward through the Iraq War, the insurgencies. You have the rise of Al-Qaeda in Iraq is really focused in the Sunni triangle. They get largely defeated and they shift over here. The Syrian civil war breaks out. We're talking 2010, 2011. And by 2013, so now let's focus on Syria a little bit just to orient ourselves. The western part of Syria here, this coastal area is where the Alawite ethnographic group holds sort of the majority. The heavily populated cities are Sunni Arab. They're Aleppo, Hama Homs. You have the Kurdish Sunni up here in this northern area, and this is it's populated, but it's largely empty desert. Key in Syria is that almost all of the oil is located in this region here, and this becomes very important later on. So the civil war breaks out, and very quickly you have Al-Qaeda in Iraq. Where am I at here? Where did it go? Al-Qaeda in Iraq is establishing itself in the northwest area here. Here we go, Idlib. They're establishing themselves in Idlib province. The moderate Syrian rebels are very heavy in Aleppo. They're in Hamas, on the outskirts of Damascus here. The Kurds begin establishing what are called the YPG, and the women version is the YPJ. These are self-defense militias of the Kurdish villages and towns here that are both resisting the oppression of Assad during the civil war, but also here in Raqqa. This is a Al-Qaeda holdout that when ISIS splits with Al-Qaeda, they seize Raqqa in 2013, and this is the first time that they openly seize and start governing territory. And this is key because if you look at it, this is they're sitting right in the middle of the Kurdish region in the north of Syria, the moderate, and the regime. The regime is very strong down here in Deir ez-Zor. And again, fast forwarding a little bit, ISIS gains power in Raqqa. They begin carving out this territory here, and in the late 2013, they take Fallujah here in outside of, and that's a huge deal. As they it was a protest camps, and that the local Sunni Arabs were protesting against the Shia Arab administration in power. I think it's under al-Nurki. But anyways, ISIS comes in, and in 2014, the collapse of Iraq, the Anbar offensive, is where they go from having a presence in al-Fallujah here to basically collapsing this entire region here, all the way up through Mosul, Kirkuk. They take Mosul. This is all in like the span of a month. It's a 6-month offensive, but Mosul falls within days. So now you have the Kurds, which were under sort of their own autonomous government, literally the only front line against ISIS left standing here. And they actually move into Kirkuk and defend Kirkuk against ISIS because the Iraqi government moves south. And you hear about the Yazdi. The Yazdi are up in this area here, and some of the, I don't know if I can find the mountain. There's a famous mountain, Sinjar Range. Anyways, over time, the Iraqi government has largely retreated to the south. They have almost no military presence here. So we're talking 2014, moving into 2015, a Kurdish coalition forms from the KDP and the PUK, working with the YPJ and the YPJ into what's called the Syrian Defense Force. And this creates a crescent arc. Now, I'm simplifying a lot of things because I'm taking this very quickly. But the Syrian Defense Force is a crescent arc of military cooperation between ethnographic Kurd fighters in this area. And it stretches all the way from Kobani over here, and they begin operating with the U.S. This is who the U.S. is partnering with in attacking ISIS. And from this position, and they begin moving in and taking back ISIS territory. So on Syria, where this ends up happening is you see here this border of Turkey, right? This is the, scroll out a little bit. Now that we've got it, right? You see this border here between Turkey. Turkey is very leery of the armed Kurds on the border here, and also of the movement of the civil war very close to the border. At some points, they're actually shelling into this region here. And keep in mind, Al-Qaeda is up here in Idlib. ISIS is in kind of this area. The ISIS ends up taking the regime strongholds of Deir ez-Zor and kind of parking there. And then Raqqa, their capital is here, and the Kurds are up in this. And this is the oil region. So this is the part, this is the 1/3 of Syria that produces 70% of the oil. So this is a really valuable piece of territory. And as the ISIS conflict wanes, I'm not going to say it's end or completed because it's not, but it ends, what you have is a very strong Kurdish presence kind of in this upper section. And Turkey has intervened in what's called Operation Olive Branch, the most ironically named operation ever. They militarily intervene in the north here, attacking Idlib. So when you hear that Turkey has intervened in Syria, they largely were intervening against the al-Nusra or al-Qaeda related factions, and they were doing some activity here, but largely fighting ISIS was up to these Kurds that are part of this SDF coalition that stretches across Syria and Iraq. What's happened recently is the U.S., as part of this, there's public knowledge now that there are U.S. troops working in this area, forward spotters, special forces, not a lot, maybe 1,000, 2,000, and they're helping the Kurds, call in airstrikes, provide training and things like that, which has been extremely effective. And I talk about this a lot more in my papers, but suffice to say, it was a very good counterinsurgency model, and it's really done a good job in pushing ISIS back. But what's happened now is what President Trump did, is there were plans underway to turn this almost like after the Iraq War. The northern part of Iraq became a special administered province for the KDP and the PUK. We had no-fly zones. We had protection. Saddam could not do reprisals. There were plans underway to create a similar safe haven area here on the northern border so that Turkey wouldn't push south. Assad, Russia, and Iran wouldn't push in, and we would kind of protect the Kurds in this area and that they could establish themselves. And we had a really good working alliance. By the way, Russia and Iran, something to keep in mind. Russia and Iran, here's Latakia and Tartus. See if I can find, well, somewhere around here is Tartus. There we go, Tartus and Latakia. Latakia is the Russian base, I believe, and Tartus is the Iranian. So they have two naval bases in Syria, and one of the reasons they're present and very interested in what happens on this left coast here is because of these two bases. And I may have them mixed. It may be the Iranians at Latakia and the Russians at Tartus, now that I think about it. But what Iran wants to do is Iran wants to create a rail line that goes across northern Iraq, across northern Syria to their naval base so they can bypass the block that exists at the Suez Canal. Iran has a very hard time influencing the Middle East and what goes on here in Israel and Lebanon with its proxies because the Suez Canal is a choke point. They want to build a railroad, and this is before ISIS. They want to build a railroad across the northern arc here. Now, Turkey, Iran, and Russia reached an agreement in 2016 to kind of carve up as spheres of influence Syria, because Assad's largely irrelevant at this point. He's just kind of a puppet. And Russia obviously wanted to have its influence around its base. Iran wanted to maintain that railroad, but that railroad goes right through the Kurdish territories. And Turkey is a little bit leery of the Kurds getting more strength and power, so they're somewhat opposed to anything that sort of normalizes a regional status as a quasi state or an emerging state. The SDF had become an emerging state actor, in my view, which means that all that's missing is sort of legal recognition, and that's Turkey's concern. But anyways, Russia and Iran over here on the left, sorry for babbling a bit, but this is important to understand. Turkey wants to move into this. They want to establish their own safe haven in this region, and use that to resettle all the refugees who have come north into Turkey into this area. That's the public reason. The likely private reason is they really want to disrupt the Syrian Defense Force and prevent the Kurdish governments that are forming there and formed and have been operating for years because there was a power vacuum. They don't want these things. They don't want a Kurdish state on their southern border. So when President Trump on Sunday announced this change, this is a massive change. It goes against everything we've been working towards in northern and northeastern Syria to create kind of a special province like was created, and it worked well. I mean, it lasted, the special autonomous region here in the north lasted right up and through the Iraq invasion, and we were good partnerships. So there was like 30 years of good cooperation here, and then under Trump, we kind of turned our back when, after ISIS was defeated, the Iraqi government came in and pushed the Kurds out of Kirkuk. We kind of stabbed him in the back there, and now we've really hosed them up because the Kurds were focused down here in the south for ISIS in these areas. So now all their forces have to kind of run back up north to the border to counter what's likely to be an imminent Turkish invasion into this region. And a big question mark, ISIS is still an active clandestine terrorist cell across these two nations. It has some insurgency activities in the Sunni Triangle area, and there's about 10 to 20,000, maybe 10 to 15,000 ISIS prisoners in this area that are, Trump says in his tweet, they're not our responsibility, and it begs the question, whose responsibility are they? Because the SDF's primary concern right now is stopping Turkey. Turkey's primary concern is stopping the SDF. If we all take our eye off the ball, not only will we be sort of betraying our allies who fought with us just recently to defeat ISIS, we'll be allowing ISIS to reconstitute itself, which it has already done twice now. And there's a real risk of being right back where we are now 3 to 5 years from now. So thanks for watching the video. Hope you enjoyed it. If you'd like to follow the InfoMullet, visit us on Facebook or Twitter. And if you'd like notifications when we post new video content, click on the red subscribe button below the video. If you've ever wanted to become a Mulleteer and support the InfoMullet, visit us on Patreon. We appreciate the support.